You're sealed inside a steel sphere, 3/4 of the way to the deepest point on Earth, and outside the porthole, the water is black as tar. Then, something moves. A pale, ghost-white shape drifts across the light, alive, feeding, in a place where nothing with a backbone should be able to survive. It was filmed at 8,336 meters down, and the instant that footage reached the surface, marine biologists began quietly rewriting their own textbooks. Because that single small fish proved something unsettling. There is a hard wall in the ocean, a depth where complex life simply stops. And that wall makes something a man swore he saw with his own eyes in 1960 completely chemically impossible. I want you to hold on to 3 letters for the next few minutes. TMAO. Because a chemistry paper published in 2014 predicted the exact depth of that wall, almost to the meter, years before any camera ever confirmed it existed. This is not legend, and it is not a campfire story. It sits in peer-reviewed journals, in the descent logs of a bathyscaphe called the Trieste, and in the sworn testimony of the only 2 men who ever rode that machine to the bottom of the world. And once I started following the trail down, I could not make myself accept the tidy answer the experts kept handing me. The first time I watched that snailfish footage, it was almost 2 in the morning, and I remember leaning so close to the screen that I could see my own reflection floating over the creature like a second ghost in the water. I didn't blink. I just kept thinking, that is not supposed to be there, and I have not really stopped thinking about it since. Let me take you back to where my obsession actually began, because it started with that fish, not with the mystery underneath it. In the autumn of 2022, a research team led by a marine biologist named Alan Jamieson lowered an autonomous camera system into the Izu-Ogasawara Trench off the southern coast of Japan. Jamieson runs the Mindaru University of Western Australia Deep Sea Research Center, and he has spent more of his life staring into the deepest trenches on the planet than almost anyone alive. He is not a mystic. He is not a showman. He is the kind of careful scientist who counts things twice and hates being quoted saying anything he can't defend. And what his camera recorded, sitting on the slope of that trench, was a snailfish. A juvenile, pale, and almost translucent, gelatinous, gliding along the seafloor as calmly as a goldfish in a bowl. The depth reading was 8,336 meters. To put that in something you can feel, that is more than 5 miles of ocean stacked on top of that little animal. The pressure down there is roughly 800 times what you feel standing on a beach. It is the weight of an adult elephant pressing on every square inch of your body, everywhere, at once. And that fish was just living in it. At first, I thought the story ended there, as a simple record, the deepest fish ever caught on film, a nice fact. But then I read the sentence that hooked me, buried in the coverage. Jamieson said his team believed they were filming a creature at or extremely close to the absolute limit. Not a limit of their technology, a limit of biology itself. He said fish almost certainly cannot go much deeper than this, maybe a couple 100 meters more, and that's the end. Below that, he said, there are no fish at all, not rare fish, none. And I remember stopping and thinking, how could he possibly know that? How can anyone stand on the edge of the deepest places on Earth, places we have barely mapped, and say with confidence that a certain kind of animal can go this far and not 1 inch further? The ocean is the last great unknown. We have better maps of Mars. So how does a scientist draw a line in the water and say, life stops here? That question is what pulled me under, because the answer turned out to be those 3 letters. And the answer is far stranger than the fish. So I went digging into the chemistry, and here is what I found. Explained the way it finally clicked for me. Every living cell is full of proteins, and proteins have to fold themselves into exact shapes to work. Think of them like tiny origami machines. Now, pressure is the enemy of that folding. The deeper you go, the more the crushing weight of the water tries to squash and unfold those proteins. And a protein that loses its shape is a protein that stops working. At a certain depth, the pressure alone should scramble a fish from the inside out. Its enzymes would seize. Its nerves would misfire. It would, in the coldest scientific terms, simply cease to function. But deep-sea animals found a trick. They pack their cells with a molecule called trimethylamine N-oxide. That is the TMAO I asked you to remember. Marine scientists just call it TMAO. If you have ever smelled that strong ocean fishy odor from fresh seafood, you have smelled it. And TMAO acts like a molecular brace. It props those proteins open and holds their shape steady against the pressure that is trying to crush them. It is, quite literally, the chemical that lets deep life exist. And here's the part that made the hair stand up on my arms. The deeper a fish lives, the more TMAO it has to carry in its cells. Scientists measured this across dozens of species, going down through the water column, and it is an almost perfectly straight line. The deeper the fish, the higher the TMAO. So, a physiologist named Paul Yancey and his colleagues asked the obvious next question. If fish keep adding more of this molecule the deeper they go, what happens at the point where they can't add any more? And in 2014, they published the answer, and it is one of the most quietly terrifying predictions I have ever read in a science journal. There is a ceiling built into the chemistry. As a fish loads more and more TMAO into its cells, the inside of its body becomes saltier and saltier, more concentrated, until it approaches the saltiness of the seawater around it. And once the inside of the fish is as concentrated as the ocean itself, the fish loses the ability to keep water out. Water floods in through its own tissues. It cannot hold itself together anymore. It cannot exist. Yancey's team ran the numbers on how much TMAO a fish could hold before it hit that fatal balance point, and they calculated the depth where it would happen. Their answer was somewhere around 8,200 meters, give or take a couple hundred. Below roughly 8,400 meters, they said, a fish is chemically impossible, not unlikely, impossible. The very molecule that protects it becomes the thing that kills it. Now sit with what that means alongside the footage. Jamieson filmed his snailfish at 8,336 meters. The chemists predicted the wall at around 8,200 to 8,400 meters. The camera and the calculation landed on almost exactly the same number, from two completely different directions, one built from test tubes and one built from a robot on the seafloor. Because if that wall is real, if 8,400 meters is truly the floor of the fish world, then I had a problem. A very old, very stubborn problem. Because 62 years before that snailfish drifted past Jamieson's camera, two men rowed a steel bathyscaphe all the way to the bottom of the Challenger Deep, nearly 11,000 meters down. That is more than 2,500 meters below the impossible line. And one of them came back up and told the world, calmly, that he had seen a fish lying on the floor of the deepest place on Earth. Let me tell you about that dive, because the more I read the original accounts, the less the official brush-off held up. On the 23rd of January, 1960, a Swiss oceanographer named Jacques Piccard and a United States Navy lieutenant named Don Walsh climbed into a cramped steel sphere bolted beneath a float filled with gasoline, and they began the longest fall any human beings have ever taken. Their vessel was the Trieste. The descent took nearly 5 hours. On the way down, at around 9,000 meters, they heard a sharp crack that shook the whole cabin, and they didn't yet know it, but one of the outer window panes had fractured. They kept going anyway. They reached the bottom at a depth their instruments read as around 10,900 meters, almost 7 miles straight down. No human being had ever been there before, and after them, no human returned for 52 years. And as their sphere settled onto the pale ooze of the seafloor, kicking up a soft cloud of sediment, Jacques Piccard looked out through that thick, cracked porthole and saw, in his own words, a flatfish. A creature that looked to him like a sole or a flounder, roughly a foot long, with 2 eyes on top of its head. He said it was lying on the bottom, and that as their light hit it, it slowly moved away. Piccard was certain. He wrote about it. He described the eyes, the shape, the movement, and to him it was the crown jewel of the entire expedition, because it seemed to answer the single biggest question science had about the deep ocean. Could vertebrate life, real fish with backbones, survive under the most extreme pressure on the planet? Piccard came back and said yes. He had watched one swim away, and for a while the world believed him. That flatfish appeared in books, in articles, in the popular story of the dive. Man reaches the bottom of the sea and finds life waiting for him. It was a perfect ending. But here is where the trail turns cold and strange, and where I first felt that something had been quietly swept aside, because the scientists who understood deep-sea biology did not believe Piccard. Not really. And rather than truly investigate what he saw, the field largely just decided he must have been mistaken and moved on. The loudest doubt came from a Danish zoologist named Torben Wolff, an expert on the animals of the deep trenches. Not long after the dive, Wolff argued that no true flatfish could possibly live at that depth, The known deep-sea fish just didn't go that far down, and the entire order of flatfishes Piccard named simply had no business being 7 miles below the surface. What Piccard saw, Wolff suggested, was far more likely a sea cucumber, a holothurian, a soft, slow, elongated animal that creeps along the deep-sea floor and can, to a startled eye peering through a cracked window in a cloud of stirred-up mud, look vaguely like a flat, gliding thing. When I lined those two figures up on my desk, that camera reading and that chemistry prediction, something happened to me that I think happens to you too. You finish a documentary like this one near midnight, and one clean number is handed to you, the case closed, the wall settled. So, you go looking for what happened next. Whether anyone went back down to check the flatfish Piccard swore he saw, and the trail just goes cold. Nobody measured, nobody answered the data. The official record wrote its verdict and quietly stopped pursuing the very thing that mattered most. That gap is exactly why I put together the 3 books behind this channel: First Threshold, Deep Signal, and Hidden Systems. They walk you through the measurements, the sourced paper trails, and the instrument logs on cases like this one, the full mainstream explanation included, so you can hold the complete file yourself instead of the half story. That is the same kind of evidence I show you right here on screen, laid out step by step so you can weigh it with your own eyes. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. And when one of these deep-sea claims comes back to the headlines told halfway, you will judge the next discovery with the data in front of you instead of swallowing the title. And that pull, that need for the whole file, is exactly why I couldn't let the flatfish go. And honestly, for a long time, that was the explanation I wanted to believe. Let me be straight with you, because this is the part where I nearly walked away from the whole mystery. I am not someone who wants the answer to be spooky. I wanted the boring answer. I wanted Piccard to be a tired, overwhelmed man who had just survived a terrifying descent, staring through a fogged porthole for a few minutes at a swirling cloud of sediment, seeing what he desperately hoped to see. That is such a human thing. He had risked his life. Of course he wanted to find life at the bottom. Of course his brain filled in a fish. And the sea cucumber theory is genuinely strong. We know for a fact that holothurians live down there. They are some of the most common large animals in the deepest trenches. They are soft, they move slowly, and in dim light, they absolutely could be mistaken for something else. The chemistry backs it up too. Everything we just walked through, the TMAO ceiling, the collapse of a fish's body past 8,400 meters, all of it screams that a real flounder at 10,900 meters is impossible. So the rational, evidence-based part of my brain said, close the case. Piccard saw an invertebrate. He was wrong. The end. I sat with that conclusion for weeks. I told myself the mystery was solved and it was a boring solve. But something kept gnawing at me, and I want to show you the exact place where my own skepticism cracked open, because it is the same place I think yours might. I went back and actually read Piccard's own detailed account instead of the summaries. And Jacques Piccard was not some wide-eyed amateur. He was the son of Auguste Piccard, the physicist who designed the bathyscaphe. Jacques had grown up around these machines. He had made many deep dives before this one. He knew better than almost anyone alive what stirred-up sediment looked like through that porthole, because he had watched it his whole career. And this was a man describing not a vague shape, but a specific animal. He described 2 eyes. He described the flatfish body plan, the compressed, bottom-hugging shape. He described it reacting to the light and moving off. Sea cucumbers do not have eyes on top of their heads. They do not look up at a light and swim away. The details he gave were oddly, stubbornly precise for a hallucination. And then I found the detail that truly broke the easy answer for me. His diving partner, Don Walsh. The Navy man who was in that sphere with him. Walsh lived a long life, all the way to 2023, and for more than 60 years, people asked him about that flatfish. And Walsh never simply confirmed it, but he also never fully dismissed it either. Over the decades, he grew more cautious, acknowledging the scientific doubts, admitting the visibility was poor and the sighting brief, saying it may not have been a fish. Yet, he never called his partner a liar, and he never gave a clean, comfortable retraction that would let everyone move on. The one other human being on Earth who was in the room left the door open. And a door left open by an eyewitness is a very hard thing to walk away from. So now I had 2 facts sitting on my desk that refused to fit together. Fact 1, the chemistry and the footage agree, almost perfectly, that fish cannot exist below roughly 8,400 meters. Fact 2, an experienced, credible observer described a vertebrate at 10,900 meters, and his witness never truly took it back. Both of those things are real. Both are documented. And they cannot both be simple. Something has to give. And this is where the trail led me to the discovery that I think is the real heart of this whole story. The thing that reframed everything, and I want to hand it to you exactly the way I finally understood it. For decades, the flatfish was treated as an embarrassment. A mistake by an enthusiastic diver, best forgotten. But when Yancey and his fellow physiologists published that TMAO sealing in 2014, they did something that no one had done before. They gave science a way to test Piccard's ghost. Before that paper, dismissing the flatfish was just an opinion. Wolff thought fish didn't go that deep, but he could not prove where the true limit was. After that paper, the limit was no longer a guess. It was a calculated, physical boundary drawn by the salt balance of a living cell, roughly 8,200 to 8,400 meters, and not 1 meter more. And then, piece by piece, the cameras went down to check. In 2014, a snailfish was filmed at around 8,145 meters in the Mariana Trench. A new species, later named Pseudoleparus swirae, formally described in 2017. Then came the deeper records, creeping upward toward the ceiling but never past it. And finally, Jamieson's fish in 2022 at 8,336 meters, sitting right at the edge of the calculated wall, as if pressed against invisible glass. Every single time across different trenches, different teams, different years, the deepest fish they found landed within a couple hundred meters of the chemistry's prediction. The wall is real. It has been tested again and again by robots that cannot lie and cannot hope, and it holds every time. Here is the reveal that I still cannot fully shake. The precision is the proof. Life did not just happen to stop somewhere vague and deep. It stopped exactly where a molecule said it must. And that turns Jacques Piccard's flatfish from a fond old story into a genuine anomaly, standing more than 2.5 kilometers below a wall that nature has now enforced, over and over, in front of our own cameras. There are only two ways to explain it, and both of them are extraordinary. Either the most experienced deep diver of his generation, in the defining moment of his life, completely misidentified a common sea cucumber and described eyes that were not there, or something moved across the floor of the Challenger Deep in 1960 that our chemistry says cannot be alive, and we have never gone back with the right eyes to find it again. Because that is the quiet scandal underneath all of this. After Piccard and Walsh, no human being descended to the bottom of the Challenger Deep for 52 years. 52 years. The single most extraordinary biological claim in the history of deep-sea exploration. A vertebrate at the very bottom of the world, and for half a century, no one went back to look. When James Cameron finally made the dive alone in 2012, he reached the bottom and reported that he saw almost nothing large moving at all. No flatfish, mostly barren ooze, which the skeptics took as final proof that Piccard imagined it. But think about that for a moment. One dive, in one small patch of a trench that is more than 1,500 miles long, on one day, seeing nothing, does not erase a sighting from another spot decades earlier. The Challenger Deep is not a fish tank. It is a vast dark canyon we have visited a handful of times in all of human history. We did not disprove Piccard. We simply stopped asking the question, filed it under mistake, and let the most important eyewitness account of the deep ocean gather dust, while the man who saw it grew old, and the man beside him carried his careful, unresolved silence to the grave in 2023. And that is what I keep coming back to, late at night, staring at that snailfish frozen on my screen. We built a beautiful, elegant proof of exactly where life ends in the sea. TMAO. 8,400 meters. A wall you can calculate on paper and then film with a camera. It is one of the most satisfying pieces of science I have ever chased. And it works so perfectly that it leaves one loose thread hanging in the dark. One observation from the very first men to ever touch the bottom that our perfect wall cannot contain, and our science chose to ignore rather than explain. Maybe Piccard was wrong. Maybe it really was a sea cucumber, and a great man's most famous memory was a trick of tired eyes and swirling mud. I have made my peace that this is probably the truth. Probably. But probably is not the same as proven, and a chemistry that can predict the ceiling of the ocean to within a few hundred meters is also a chemistry precise enough to make one man's flatfish, 2.5 kilometers below that ceiling, the strangest unsolved sentence in the entire logbook of the deep. So here is what I am left holding and what I am handing to you now. We found the edge of life. We proved it with a molecule and confirmed it with a camera, and the fish obeyed the rule exactly. But at the very bottom of the world, below the edge of everything, an experienced man swore he watched something look up at his light and swim away, and the science that explains all the rest of the ocean has no room for that one animal at all. The wall is real, and something may have been living behind it. If you are the kind of person who cannot accept a mystery just because a committee decided 60 years ago that it was too inconvenient to investigate, then you already feel the pull of that loose thread the same way I do. You are not looking for comfort. You are looking for the truth that got filed away because it did not fit. So I want to ask you directly, and I genuinely want your answer. Do you think Jacques Piccard saw a real fish at nearly 11,000 meters, something our chemistry cannot yet explain? Or do you think it was a sea cucumber, and the greatest deep-sea explorer of his age simply saw what he ached to see? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where in the world you are watching from, because I read them, and the sharpest ideas I chase down next almost always come from you. And if part of you refuses to let cases like this stay closed, then stay with me here, because this is what we do. We go back to the accounts everyone else stopped reading, and we follow them all the way to the bottom. There is another sound down there in the deep that I have not been able to explain. A low, impossibly loud noise recorded across thousands of miles of ocean in 1997 that the people who caught it still argue about to this day. That is where I am going next. Come with me, and let's find the thing they said we would never explain. If you're still with me, let me show you where this goes next. Inside the Unexplained Society, I pick up right where we just stopped. In there, you can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself. A real person, not a machine. And you won't be alone. So many mystery lovers like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime. Now, if that creature surprised you, wait until you see this. There's a new predator hunting the ocean's giants, and the footage left marine biologists stunned. It's starting right here, so stay with me and watch what happens next.